Kia ora koutou katoa to the NBR whānau, and welcome to this edition of Te Ohanga Māori column focusing on the Māori economy. This week's column comes from Barry Soutar, who joins me now from Tairāwhiti, Gisborne. Kia ora, Barry.
Morena.
So your column this week looks at the tyranny of distance and Aotearoa's relative isolation from global markets. How do you see these issues manifesting?
It's a funny one. Tyranny of distance is death by silence. What I mean is that here's a classic example. I live in Gisborne, and if you think the heart of the economic engine of New Zealand is about 40% of production comes out of Auckland, and you're not connected to opportunities, innovation, and conversations going on in Auckland on a regular basis, then you can potentially risk missing out. If you think about any of the export companies of New Zealand, they're constantly in Zoom calls and phone calls once you've got trusted relationships, into market overseas and with partners up in places like Auckland. So when you don't have that volume of calls and that quality of calls, then that silence is the thing that causes death by 1,000 cuts, in the sense that you don't know what you're missing out on until you read about it in the paper.
Sure. And you're trying to address that tyranny yourself. You've just mentioned off air that you're doing a bit more travel these days, especially to Auckland.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing that you sometimes have to drink your own Kool-Aid and follow your instructions. I find it quite funny, really. I spent 5 years at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, helping companies scale internationally, and we had all of the advice. We were well informed ourselves. Those of us who were not previously entrepreneurs, we had lots of intel from great strategists internationally and that sort of thing. So you had all the best of advice to give to a company, and so yes, I know all 10 points that I should be actually following myself. But it is a challenge when you got your nose to the grindstone and having to follow your own advice.
Yeah. So in the column, you sort of mentioned an interesting example of isolation and that distance from global markets being Israel. Obviously, in the past sort of 60, 70 years, has come through war and conflict to be one of the more productive and efficient markets on the global scale. Tell me a little bit about that comparison.
Yeah, perhaps. When I've thought about the top 5 countries that have built startup economies, particularly in tech, I could have chosen other countries, and perhaps I should have, given the current circumstances in Ukraine. So what I see missing in New Zealand is a single tech strategy led by the government. Now, interesting enough, I was at a Morgo conference about 3 weeks ago, and when they spoke to, excuse me for that sound, but when they spoke to the place of government in terms of leading a strategy nationally, they approached it from individual entrepreneurship, and as far as they were concerned, the government was irrelevant, except in terms of structural things like tax and that sort of stuff. What my point was is that that's your typical New Zealand attitude, which is just go out there and rip shit and bust. But my view is that if you don't think and act in a concerted manner as a country and have a strategy that all the parts of the ecosystem are working towards, then it's just from a straight business point of view, it's a waste of resources. And particularly when you're not singing to the same song sheet. So Israel's a classic example where they had some artificial circumstances that drove their need to actually get smart and get innovative really fast. But probably Ireland's actually an even better example. Something like about 60 years ago, one Irish civil administrator created the economic strategy, of which tech was a major part. They could see that far out that tech was going to become a major contributor to the well-being and economics of the country. And then the great thing was that as the politicians changed, and every 3-year cycle they had a new prime minister, the same civil administrator carried on for 35 years of that reign, which meant that he really deeply embedded the single strategy of which tech was a winner. And we all saw that with the what they call the Celtic Tiger phenomenon.
Okay, so there is a lot of talk from government about strategy, digital strategy at the moment, technology strategies. Do you think that's perhaps misdirected, or what's the solution here locally?
I think it's limited. I think it's got to be technology, because digital is only just one component of tech. There's not a single industry that I am aware of that doesn't require significant tech to drive its business, from an automation workflow point of view, and also from a functional enhancement point of view. So the way you get your products, particularly in software, etc., high uptake by customers, is by enhancing the customer experience. So the better the experience of the customer, the more likely the customer will switch platforms to yours. The other piece of productivity gain is when you can automate workflow. So it's not actually rocket science to sit down and have a look at your workflow and say, how many humans can I remove from that equation?
And speaking of rocket science, you've also mentioned here in the column a business called Stardustme. What's that about?
That's a young Māori guy here in Gisborne. He doesn't originate from here. He's from Whakatane, so he's Ngāti Aotearoa hard. But what I admire of smart young entrepreneurs is their ability to see a gap in the market and then work hard to create a product or service to meet that one. And that one is a partnership he has with the funeral directors of New Zealand to provide a more sustainable experience for loved ones. Normally culturally in New Zealand, we when our loved ones pass on, we just bury them and that's about it. And you might go and visit the headstone, in a few years, but that's about it. His one gives a more ongoing sustainable experience, and one that gives you many touch points. So success in modern business, particularly in the new tech platform area, is around customer engagement and the number of sticky transactions you can have with a customer. So this one, we over a 10-year period before the rockets return to the atmosphere and burn up, gives you an ongoing contact and relationship with your loved one by virtue of where the satellite is on the planet. We have a number of other ideas that we're working to help them with around increasing that customer engagement experience. And I just love the idea that we're doing that from Gisborne, and we're doing it based on Māori culture.
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing idea, shooting for the stars. Okay, well, thanks very much for your time, Barry, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
No problem. Thank you.